Okay, so are you fascinated by, like, the power of your own brain?
Who isn't?
Right. We're about to take a deep dive into all things Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Oh, I like him. He's great.
Yeah, he's a neuroscientist at Stanford, and he was recently interviewed and gave away some really, really interesting information. So we're here to break that down, get ready for some pretty surprising facts about, well, how to work with your brain and not against it.
What I find fascinating about him is he can take something that's really complex, like neuroscience, and make it actually practical. Like give you things you can use right away.
Totally. I love that about him. And that's what we're all about here, actionable stuff.
Exactly. So should we just, jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the things that I find really useful is this framework he talks about, this duration, path, outcome. It's basically how our brains analyze any kind of challenge.
Okay.
And he uses the COVID-19 pandemic as, a prime example.
Oh, yeah.
Of all that uncertainty just throws our brains for a loop.
Oh, tell me about it. It was like, how long is this going to last? What's going to happen next? Like every day. So stressful.
Exactly. And your brain, it's like it wants those answers, right? And when things are constantly changing,
Yeah.
it leads to that stress, that burnout.
Sure.
But here's, I think, the key takeaway for me. Dr. Huberman suggests that even when things are uncertain, like even when you don't know the answers, if you can create even a small sense of control, it can really help manage that stress.
So it's like tricking your brain into thinking it's got a handle on things, even when the bigger picture is like totally out of control.
Yeah, precisely.
Right.
It'd be as simple as having a routine or just focusing on what you can actually influence in that moment.
Okay, so choosing to like focus your attention on something that you can control.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. It's like if you're out in the middle of the ocean and there's a storm, you focus on like just that little patch of calm water right in front of you.
Exactly. It's about shifting your perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Focusing on what you can control and giving your brain that little break. And that actually ties into another one of his big things, focus.
Okay.
So he explains how intense focus triggers the release of acetylcholine. It's a neurochemical. Basically what it does is it marks the pathways in your brain for change.
So the focus is like step one in like rewiring your brain. But then you were saying earlier that the actual rewiring happens later when you're sleeping.
Precisely. So focus is like the practice, and then sleep is like the integration. So during deep sleep, that's when your brain is actually solidifying those new connections that you've kind of laid the groundwork for.
Okay, so I can't just like pull an all-nighter and expect to like magically retain all this information.
Probably not. Let's just say a well-rested brain is a more adaptable brain.
Good to know. Good to know. Now, I'm kind of curious about Dr. Huberman himself. I heard he took a kind of a roundabout way to get to where he is today.
Yeah, it's true. His early life was kind of a mix of serious scientific influence and then this whole other side. So he talks about growing up with his dad, who was a physicist at Stanford, always surrounded by, intellectual discussions, that kind of stuff.
Talk about an interesting upbringing.
Right. But then he also talks about how, when he was a teenager, his parents divorced, and he kind of got into the skateboarding scene in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like a completely different world, lots of energy, little bit of chaos. He's pretty open about the troubles he got into, even got kicked out of high school.
Wow, that's quite the contrast.
Right. And it's interesting because it could have gone either way for him,
Right.
But there's this one altercation I think he talks about that became a real turning point. He realized he needed to change his direction. And he decided to really focus that energy, that intensity into something he was passionate about, neuroscience.
And that led him to, get his PhD, become a professor at Stanford.
Exactly. It's kind of his journey embodies that idea of neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
That the brain can change and adapt throughout your whole life.
Amazing. And that brings us back to this whole focus thing.
Right.
It's not just about that, that classic studying for a test or learning a new skill. It's really about rewiring your brain for resilience to be able to deal with things that happen in your life.
Exactly. And this is where his work on the dopamine system comes in.
Okay.
A lot of people think of dopamine as this feel-good chemical, but he really emphasizes that it's much more about motivation.
Okay.
It's what drives us towards goals.
So it's not just about that reward itself. It's about the whole pursuit of something, right?
Yes. He says that dopamine is released not only when you achieve something big, but also when you're on the right path,
Oh, okay.
when you're hitting those milestones.
So it's about acknowledging and celebrating even those small wins along the way, right?
Yes.
Okay. But how do we tap into that? How do we actually use this dopamine system effectively?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. He actually draws this parallel to the animal kingdom.
Okay.
He talks about a deer
A deer
that's thirsty.
Okay.
So imagine this deer. It doesn't know it needs water, but it feels this agitation. And that's what drives it to seek out a stream. And when it finally drinks,
Oh.
that's when that dopamine is released.
Oh, it's like that aha moment, right?
Exactly.
When you solve a problem or you finally, figure out the solution, you get that, yes, I did it.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is dopamine.
Okay.
It's not just the reward, it's that journey.
Oh, I see.
It's the struggle. It's the process of getting to the finish line. That's what really motivates us to keep going.
So even those moments when we're frustrated, we want to give up.
Yeah.
That's all part of it.
Exactly. It's about reframing those feelings.
Yeah.
And not seeing them as failures,
Yeah.
but as signals that you're on the right track, that you're pushing yourself.
You're growing.
Yes, exactly.
This is a game changer, seriously.
It is.
It's not about avoiding the hard stuff. It's like, leaning into it.
Yeah.
Knowing that it's part of the process.
Yes, but, and, this is often easier said than done, our brains have this lovely habit of, that negative self-talk.
Oh, tell me about it.
That monkey mind just goes.
Oh, my monkey mind could win, gold medals in the mental Olympics.
Right. And it can really sabotage us, We get stuck in our heads. But here's the thing, Dr. Huberman, he says that trying to, suppress those negative thoughts, it doesn't really work.
Okay.
So you're giving them more power in a way. He says, we need to get more proactive. We need to consciously introduce the thoughts that we want to be thinking.
So it's I don't know, instead of letting your mind just wander aimlessly and ruminate on all the negative stuff, it's about saying, okay, I'm going to focus my attention on this task, on this goal, or whatever it is.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your attention, consciously directing it where you want it to go.
Okay, love that, but easier said than done, right? So let's say my monkey mind is full-on chimpanzee mode. What do I do right then to get back in the driver's seat?
Okay, so this is where Dr. Huberman talks about real-time tools.
Okay, give them to me.
These are things that you can use in the moment to regulate your nervous system.
Yes, I need some of those.
One of the simplest but most effective is something he calls the physiological sigh.
The physiological sigh. Intrigued. Never heard of it.
So it's a breathing pattern. You take 2 inhales, and then you do 1 long exhale.
Okay.
Sounds really simple, right?
Yeah.
But he stresses it's not just about taking a deep breath. You're actually engaging your diaphragm in this very specific way. And it signals your nervous system to chill out.
Okay. I will try that next time my anxiety is going through the roof. I'm going to try this out.
Yeah. He says it's super effective.
Yeah.
That double inhale, it helps to fully inflate your lungs. And when you get rid of that carbon dioxide, it actually has a direct impact on calming you down.
Okay. So we're basically hacking our nervous systems through our breath.
Exactly.
I love it.
And speaking of hacking our nervous systems, he also talks about this really interesting connection between our vision and our state of mind.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
How do our eyes play a role in how alert and focused we are?
So you know how when you're stressed or alert, your pupils dilate?
Yeah.
Think about if you see something startling, your eyes widen, right?
Yeah.
That's your nervous system going into overdrive.
It's that fight or flight, right? Like when you see a spider.
Exactly. But here's where it gets cool. Dr. Huberman says we can actually consciously control that dilation.
Wait, are you serious? We can.
By shifting what we're looking at.
Oh, wow. So we can calm ourselves down by simply changing where we're looking.
Exactly. Because when our pupils constrict, when we're focusing on something up close, it actually increases stress and anxiety.
Oh.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, instead of staring at your computer screen,
right.
Look at something in the distance, like the horizon.
So it's almost like tricking your brain into thinking there's not a threat, right?
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Because it's just a simple thing.
It is. It's amazing how, our breath, our vision, our thoughts, even our pupils are all connected.
They are.
Wow.
And speaking of connections, he also has some, I think, really revolutionary things to say about recovery.
Okay.
He's a big proponent of it, but not just in that traditional, oh, you need your physical rest way.
Okay.
He says that recovery is also crucial for focus and mental flexibility.
Ah, okay.
And he suggests doing things like yoga nidra and non-directed walking.
Non-directed walking. I'm not familiar with that one. What is that? What's so special about walking, like, with no set destination?
It's about letting go of that duration, path, outcome thinking that we're so used to.
Right.
When you're not focused on a goal, your mind can wander, and that can be so restorative.
So it's almost like, I don't know, like hitting the reset button on your brain.
Exactly. It shifts your brain into this different mode. And he also talks about yoga nidra. Have you ever tried that?
I have, but I always fall asleep. I don't know. It's like my brain here is relaxed, and it's like shutting down.
It's really common, actually, but he says that even if you do fall asleep,
Okay.
your brain is still benefiting.
It's still working in the background.
Exactly.
Okay, well, this is a lot to take in.
All right.
And I feel like we're just getting started.
We are. Buckle up, because we're going to dive even deeper. We're going to talk about hypnosis and addiction, and we're even going to get into how understanding our own neurology can help us, like as a planet, deal with some of these global challenges that we're facing.
Okay, you've got my attention. I am very curious to dive into that. Let's do it so we can like hack our brains to be more resilient, more focused. I'm in.
Right. Who wouldn't want that?
Totally.
Yeah.
So how do we like upgrade our mental operating systems?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Huberman talks about hypnosis.
Hypnosis. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, it's not about like swinging pocket watches.
Right.
It's really about using deep relaxation, but at the same time, really focused attention to make changes that last.
Okay. I've got to admit, hypnosis always seemed kind of like a parlor trick to me. How can it actually like rewire my brain?
Think of it this way. Your brain is like a garden, right?
Okay, I like this.
And learning is like planting seeds. So hypnosis is like prepping the soil, creating those ideal conditions for those seeds to really take root and grow.
So it's about getting into a state of mind where you're primed for change.
Exactly. He says when you go into a hypnotic state, you're deeply relaxed, but you're still maintaining that focus, and that's key. It's like a guided meditation almost, but it helps you tap into that subconscious part of your mind where those really deep patterns, you know, those thought patterns and behaviors, they live there.
So it's like instead of constantly battling those old habits or, you know, those negative thought spirals, hypnosis helps you kind of rewrite the script, but on a deeper level.
Precisely. And he says it can be used for all sorts of things, reducing anxiety, sleeping better, even breaking bad habits.
That's amazing. Okay, but what about those of us who tend to, you know, maybe drift off during meditation? I'm terrible at yoga nidra. I always fall asleep.
Oh, that's so common. It happens to a lot of people. But here's the interesting thing. He says, even if you do doze off a little bit, your brain is still in it. It's still there, absorbing those suggestions.
So even if I'm like lightly snoring in the corner, my brain's still getting a workout.
Exactly. It's working behind the scenes.
I love it. Okay.
And it just shows how adaptable our brains really are.
Yeah.
You know, we always underestimate what our brains are capable of.
It's true. We're always so hard on ourselves. So you mentioned earlier that Dr. Huberman also has some pretty interesting views on addiction.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff.
What's his take?
Well, he describes addiction as this progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure.
Okay.
It's basically like as we get more and more dependent on something, a substance, a behavior, whatever it is, our brains actually rewire themselves to chase that one source of reward over everything else.
Oh, wow. So it's like our brain gets fixated on that one thing and everything else just loses its appeal.
Yeah, it's like getting stuck in a loop. He uses the example of gambling. You know how at first there's the thrill of winning, the excitement, the anticipation.
Yeah.
But over time, he says the act of gambling itself, even if you're not winning, becomes the reward.
It's not even about the money anymore. It's about chasing that dopamine hit.
Exactly. And it's the same with like social media, video games, even work.
Workaholism, yeah.
Makes sense.
Right. And what he emphasizes is it's not about willpower or like you're a weak person if you're addicted. It's about understanding how your brain works and then figuring out how to regain control.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So how do we break free? Where do we even begin?
Well, Dr. Huberman, he's a big believer in the power of the autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
That's the part of your nervous system that, you know, controls your breathing, your heart rate, things like that.
Right. And he says that with addiction, people become disconnected from those automatic functions.
Interesting.
Their brain is kind of stuck in this like overdrive mode, always looking for the next dopamine hit.
So it's like our internal alarm system is always going off.
Yes, and that makes it really hard to relax, to think clearly, to make good decisions. But the good news is we can retrain our nervous systems.
Okay, good. I need to know this.
And this is where those real-time tools come in.
Yes, the real-time tool.
The breathing exercises, the mindfulness, even cold exposure, these can help you reset that nervous system, give you more control.
So it's not just about like calming down in the moment, but it's about rewiring your brain to be stronger, less reactive.
Exactly.
So we can be the CEO of our own brains. I like it.
That's it. He makes another connection, too, between our nervous system and our ability to, really communicate.
Oh, interesting. I've definitely noticed that connection. Like when I'm stressed, I'm definitely not a good listener.
Right. I mean, think about it. When you're feeling defensive or you're angry or stressed out, how open are you to really listening to someone, especially if they disagree with you?
Not very. I'm much more interested in proving my point than actually understanding where they're coming from.
It's totally natural. Our brains, they're wired for survival.
Yeah.
So when we sense a threat, those stress hormones, they go through the roof and we go into fight or flight mode.
Right.
And that makes us way more reactive, less empathetic, and way less likely to have a productive conversation.
So if we're wired to like shut down when we're stressed, how do we break free from that?
Well, he says it starts with just noticing it,
Okay.
like recognizing when you're in that heightened state.
Okay, so I notice that I'm getting all fired up. Then what?
That's when you can use those real-time tools.
Oh, yeah.
Take a few deep breaths, maybe look out the window, do that physiological sigh. Those things can actually help calm your nervous system down, and you can think more clearly.
It's like you're hitting the pause button on that knee-jerk reaction.
Exactly.
And give yourself a chance to like choose a better response.
Yeah, and the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Makes sense.
And he says, it's not about suppressing your emotions, right? It's not about pretending there's no conflict. It's really about creating the space to have more, like productive conversations, compassionate conversations.
Yeah, recognizing that we're all just wired to connect.
Right. But sometimes our biology gets in the way, which makes you wonder, how do we apply this to like the big picture stuff, the divides we're seeing in society?
Well, that's where it gets really, really important. He says this addiction we have to outrage, to being right all the time, it's actually making things worse.
Oh, yeah.
Because we get stuck in our little echo chambers.
Right, and we love it when our beliefs get validated.
Exactly, even if those beliefs are, not really serving us as a vicious cycle. But he says if we understand how our brains work, we can actually break free.
So it's not about like erasing our differences.
No.
It's about how we approach them.
Yes, with curiosity, with empathy.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So it's like we need to, upgrade our collective operating system. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Become more aware, more discerning, less reactive. And he's really passionate about, passing this on to the next generation.
I was going to say he talks a lot about kids.
He does. And how important it is to teach them that, it's okay to not be okay.
To feel those uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, because that's how we grow. And I think we're so afraid of discomfort these days.
We try to protect our kids from it.
Yeah, which is natural.
Yeah.
But he says, by doing that, we're actually kind of doing them a disservice.
Interesting.
Because challenges, they make us stronger.
So it's like that saying, you can't have rainbows without a little rain.
Exactly. It's about embracing the whole experience.
Embrace the chaos. Wow, this has been, truly mind-blowing.
Fascinating stuff, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. So where do we go from here? What do we do with all this amazing information?
Well, I think he leaves us with this really hopeful message. Like, we actually have the power to create a better future, but it starts with each of us.
Okay.
We have to take care of our own minds, our own well-being, and then we can connect with other people, build a better world.
Love it. It's about recognizing that, we have way more power than we think we do.
We do.
To shape not just our own lives, but the world around us.
We have to be intentional, though.
Yeah.
We have to make conscious choices every single day.
Well said. And on that note, keep those brains buzzing. This has been amazing. Thanks for this deep dive. I've learned so much.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
Until next time, everyone.